Hello and welcome to the Film File, your friendly neighborhood film geeks presenting your friendly neighborhood film geek show. Roll music, look happy, here we come.
Dun, 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 dun.
I'm glad you do that. It
Dun,
makes
dun,
it feel.
dun, dun, dun. Dun, dun, dun.
And this is the Film File, and you're back within the. I'll do that all again. Yes, this is the Film File, and we're back, as are you, to join us for, I'd like to say an hour, but I know it'll be much more than that, of film news, film fun with us, your friendly neighborhood film geeks. I'm Lee Ford,
And I'm Andy Beacon.
and as ever, you're part of this wonderful and rich film community, a family, if you may. Come, join us on this journey. And
Bit
talking
of
of
a dysfunctional
journeys,
family.
a dysfunctional family. It was like Modern Family for film geeks.
We haven't seen half of you for ages, and I hope you're going to come and visit us at Christmas.
Yeah, pop round.
Bring
gifts.
something to eat, because I can't afford that
Yeah.
much.
Don't know if you can get there because of petrol, but do your best. Still with us? Still listening to the Film File? Good on you. I was about to choke on a piece of bacon. Good on you. And you know what? We love having you. So much so that we're going to suggest that you head over to your favorite podcast platform. And if you haven't done so, hit the subscribe button and hit the like button. And while you're at it, knock out a review for us, will you? Because it makes us so warm and lovely inside and not angry. Because, well, you wouldn't like us when we're angry. You can also check out the Film File on
Twitter at Filmfile UK, over on Instagram, Filmfile UK, or you can email us with thoughts, suggestions, reviews, problems. I mean, we've done this before. I'm happy to be an agony uncle, and I will talk about your problems on air if you're fine with that.
You know what, Andy? What would be great would be if you were an agony uncle about film stuff.
Oh, that would be
I
awesome.
never really liked Pierce Brosnan as James Bond. Well, this is what you could do. Why don't you go and check out the Timothy Dalton years, for instance? Or, I'm having problems with my girlfriend, and I don't know what film to watch tonight to get her in the mood. Here is a list of suggestions. See what we did?
So-
It works perfectly.
I can be the agony uncle for all you film geeks out there. Send us an email. Go on. I dare you. Podcast at filmfile.uk.
That made me chuckle. I don't know why. So, as you know, at this point in the program, it is our deep dive, where we take a deep dive into a classic movie, an interesting choice, or a film that we just adore. And as you know, James Bond is back this week. I can't remember the title for this Bond hasn't sunk in at all. Maybe because everything's
No Time to Die.
Yeah. James Bond is back this week with No Time to Die. Should have come out last year, but it's with us this very week. So rather than talk about just one James Bond and just one James Bond actor, let's talk about the whole darn series. Take it away, John Barry.
Insert theme tune. Theme tune.
So James Bond was created by novelist Ian Fleming in 1953. And as you know, a British secret agent working for MI6 under the code name 007. He's been portrayed by many actors, including Sean Connery, David Niven, George Lazenby, Roger Moore, Timothy Dalton, Pierce Brosnan, and now Daniel Craig, in 27 productions. All but 2 were made by Eon Films, who now hold the rights to all of Fleming's Bond novels. The film series started in 1961 with Dr. No, directed by Terence Young, and featured Connery as Bond. It was released as Bond. Following its release in 1962, Broccoli and Saltzman created the holding company. No, I don't need to know that. Following its release, I think we could leave it there.
Mm-hmm.
Featuring Connery as Bond. The series currently has, as I said, 24 films, and is sorry, I'm reading bits of notes. I over prepared this one, so I'll just do that. The series of films followed in 1962, and as I said, there have been 24 films with a combined gross of nearly $7 billion today, and it's the sixth highest grossing film series of all time. Andy, I know we've got a lot to get through. What was your first introduction to Bond? What was the first Bond film that you ever saw?
I couldn't put my finger on which would be the first of the Bond films, but I can tell you that as a child, holiday times, Easter, Christmas, any bank holidays, it was always going to be a Bond film on either BBC or ITV that I would tune into. And this is another one of those that I used to sit there when we got the Radio Times and look across on a bank holiday Monday and circle which film I wanted to watch. And it would have been one of the Roger Moore era, because the Roger Moore films got a lot of rotation on TV during my 7 to 9 to 10-year-old era. And I was drawn straight away to the ones that I can remember specifically watching on TV are Live and Let Die, The Man with the Golden Gun. They are the two that most commonly would pop up. Sean Connery ones would also get put into the rotation, but they didn't quite have that memorable hold on me as a young child. Basically, if BBC was showing Goldfinger and ITV was showing Live and Let Die, which occasionally happened on Boxing Day, that they both go head to head with a different Bond from a different era, I would be circling Live and Let Die, because as a child, I wanted to see more. I wanted to see more. And so that was my early introduction to Bond, was through TV. The first one that I saw on the cinema was Moonraker.
Okay.
Which...
You see, carry on, sorry.
Which, as a child, I absolutely adored Moonraker, and I know it doesn't stand up well over time, and neither does any of the Roger Moore era, to be honest with you. But I lapped that up as a child because it was Bond going into space, and it was tapping into that like whole sci-fi element of adventure that had started when Star Wars had come out. So that was my first cinema experience, Moonraker. But aside from that, it was always Boxing Day, Easter Monday, any bank holidays, always got to be a Bond film on TV. And no matter how many times I'd seen them, I would always rewatch them.
I remember, and I'm not sure what... Start again. I remember, and I'm not sure in which order this started, whether I saw Bond on TV first or I went to the cinema. So when ITV got the rights to the Bond film, and this is in the day when there were 3 channels,
yeah,
it was such a big deal. I mean, it was a revelation. And they started with, of course, Dr. No, and they showed them in chronological order. So I'm not sure whether I came into Bond, because I do remember seeing Dr. No on television, or I started with Diamonds Are Forever in the cinema. So that bit of chronology, I'm unsure about. But I did see Diamonds Are Forever first, and it was the last of, as we know, the Sean Connery movies until Never Say Never Again came up. And then the mantle got passed to Roger Moore for Live and Let Die. Now, Roger Moore was one of those actors that I'd kind of grown up with in the early 70s. So Roger Moore initially made much more of an impact on me. I knew him from The Saint. I knew him from various movies, and I knew him from The Persuaders. And so Roger Moore stepping into it suddenly made him my favourite Bond. It's when I got a bit older and reassessed and got to know more of the Connery Bonds that order changed.
Mm.
Live and Let Die was my first, quickly followed by Man with the Golden Gun. Golden Finger sounds so obscene. And that was followed by Man with the Golden Gun. And I was in, and every time a Bond film came out, I would be there in the cinema to see it. Right up to Moonraker. Because when Moonraker landed, I was done with Bond. I hated where they'd taken Bond from this suave super spy. Spy Who Loved Me pushed the envelope as much as it could. And then by the time it got to Moonraker, they'd not just pushed the envelope; they'd stepped over the envelope, burnt the envelope, and gone in a direction. Because I hate camp, and I
Yeah.
hated what Bond had become, and I was getting a bit older as well, so I'm sure it was there, but I think Moonraker overpushed it, and it became a spoof of what it was. You know, the play on Close Encounters, the play on the sci-fi thing, and Bond was following trends rather than setting trends as it had done in the '60s, and I was out, and I didn't see another Bond film at the cinema until Timothy Dalton replaced Connery with Living Daylights, and then I was back in again. So I've had a relationship with
Mm.
James Bond through the movies my entire life. I had got reading the novels, but they were so severely dated,
Yeah.
even reading them as in a much younger age, that I just couldn't connect with them at all, and desperately tried and had to go at a couple of them. I remember trying to read Thunderball, and while they are much more gritty, I just didn't connect to them because the language is it is so much of its time. But I'll always be with Bond, and it's played a massive influence in my cinema going, because for a long time they were the herald of British cinema, because ultimately they were British films.
I'm the same as you. That when I was young, like I said, Roger Moore, I loved everything that he did. But as I got older, as I got into my early teens and started to watch the Connery films a lot more, I started to appreciate that version of Bond a lot more. And kind of fell out of love with Moore's one whilst they were running. I mean, I saw Moonraker onwards all at the cinema. I saw Octopussy at the cinema. Oh, why did I do that? But I remember when A View to a Kill came out, and I was all over that like a rash. And I know it's not a good film, but yeah, there was a poster collection that you could get from collecting cutouts from the back of crisp packets, and I got all four posters. Mainly because I went skip diving outside the leisure centre to get all the empty crisp packets to
As
send
one
off to get me
does,
free posters.
you have to do
Um,
these things.
I was obsessed with it, and at the time I thoroughly enjoyed it. But I was getting more and more aware that what Connery brought to the role was something a lot edgier and a bit rough around the edges, and that's what Bond was to me. Like yourself, I delved into the books, and I've got some love for the books, but yes, they are a hard read. They are very of their time. But in that, I saw what Bond should be, which is that edgier. It is that hard-edged Bond. It's not the Roger Moore knowing wink at camera and quote an innuendo and give a bad pun. And so once Timothy Dalton came around, I lapped up what Dalton did. I loved that they went back to like a Connery-esque kind of approach and tried to make it grittier, tried to make it more serious. Still had some gadgets, but they offloaded so many of them, got rid of the ridiculous nature. And for those two films, Bond was great again.
Yeah, I mean, they weren't the best Bond films, but I think Timothy Dalton definitely brought back that hard edge, which had really been missing, and where Moore had become far too old for the role by the time he got to make View to a Kill, and it was starting to show, and they couldn't shoot around it. Moore should have packed it in after Moonraker, because For Your Eyes Only it was a kind of a return to what we liked about Bond. Octopussy I never saw. View to a Kill I've only seen on television, but I didn't buy it. The only thing I enjoyed about that was the music. But yeah, Timothy Dalton brought that back. And then when we got Pierce Brosnan, and I think Timothy Dalton was hard done by. I think he should have had at least
The,
another film.
the biggest problem with Dalton is that he was bringing a rougher edged Bond back at a time when cinema goers wanted action films with jokes. They wanted Arnold Schwarzenegger saying, "Stick around, get to the chopper." They wanted the ridiculous action. They didn't want a gritty Bond.
Yeah,
It
it kind of
was,
fell in that two spaces, didn't it? Because when Dalton suggested that he wouldn't be coming back, or it was made apparent that Dalton wouldn't come back, it looked like at one point that Mel Gibson was going to get the role,
yeah.
and they wanted to take it almost down a Lethal Weapon style of filmmaking, all to do with rights and the studio which studio bought Bond, but at one point Mel Gibson was hotly tipped to take over Bond, and I'm sure he would have done a good job because back then the Mel Gibson that we know of today didn't have the baggage. He'd come straight off Lethal Weapon, was a huge international star, and before Lethal Weapon had been pretty much a dramatic actor rather than action hero. So it would have been interesting if they played it with a British accent. But that brought us to Pierce Brosnan. And Pierce Brosnan had been up for the part much earlier. In fact, he looked initially to take over from Roger Moore, but his work on Remington Steele, the TV series he was in at the time, contractually meant that he couldn't play Bond. But he eventually got the role. As he got a little bit older and lost some of the more younger looking aspect, if you get what I mean. He was a little bit too pretty while he was in Remington Steele, but by the time he got to play Bond in GoldenEye back in 1995, those rough edges were clearly on display, and it brought a maturity to Bond. So it was an interesting era. It was brought back by Martin Campbell, who would then later bring back Casino Royale with Daniel Craig. But it was a patchy era. I have a lot of time for GoldenEye, great Bond film. Tomorrow Never Dies. The World Is Not Enough is okay. Die Another Day, by the time we get to that, was a complete joke and killed the career of director Lee Tamahori altogether, because it was a mishmash of Bond ideas and almost went back to being a Roger Moore film.
I've just done a rewatch of all of the Brosnan era because I started a rewatch of my whole box set of Bond when No Time to Die was due out last year. And then it got moved. And so I stopped my rewatch after I'd watched a few Connery films. And then I started watching it again towards the back end of last year when No Time to Die was due to get released. And then it got moved. So I stopped my rewatch once I got like a part way into the Roger Moore. And so I've started it over the past month to continue the rewatch. And I've now got all the way through the Brosnan era. And I remember liking GoldenEye when it came out. And I remember liking it when I watched it on home release. But this recent revisit hasn't held up well for me.
Sorry, just go carry on. Sorry, I was more apologising than I was getting you to stop.
Yeah, the recent revisit has made me look at it kind of not as good as it was, and I think it's because I've watched the Dalton 2 films back to back, and then went straight onto GoldenEye, and I can see that all that Pierce Brosnan did, he didn't bring anything new to the role. He's cosplaying Roger Moore, and that's all that he brought to it. He just went back to the girls, the gadgets, and the innuendos, and there's literally every third line of dialogue is a bad pun. And it'd be like if I wrote a bad dad jokes book version of Bond. That's what the Brosnan era in total turned out to be. It got they got weaker and weaker as the films went on. And I think one of the biggest problems it had is around the same time as GoldenEye came out, Mike Myers brought us Austin Powers and pointed fun at all the nonsense that Bond was still trying to do. And it made Bond look dated for its time because Austin Powers was doing it better and funnier.
Well, I mean, interestingly, GoldenEye was the opportunity to wipe the slate clean, and it did so really, really well. I think Martin Campbell brought a new edge to Bond, really updated it. And we got Judi Dench as M in that one. We finally got a new Moneypenny. It just started to fall apart by the time we got to World Is Not Enough. I've got a soft spot for Tomorrow Never Dies. I thought that was a good, strong Bond film. But as we go through until we get to Die Another Day, they were so weakened. And as you said, they were a throwback to Roger Moore when the world had moved on. And to some extent, and to some extent Casino Royale. And many people criticised the film for it, saw what was happening within the genre, because at that point we'd got the Jason Bourne films.
Yeah, Bourne was seeking identities, missions were being impossible everywhere, and Bond looked too dated. So it needed that reinvigoration for the Bond franchise to make it darker, make it grittier.
So along comes, sorry, I'll just join my notes. So along comes Martin Campbell again to reintroduce Bond with a new Bond, and we got Daniel Craig. Now, for me, Daniel Craig is the epitome of Bond. I can't go against anything that Sean Connery did because I think everything that Sean Connery did set the standard, especially from Russia with Love, which is probably ultimately on the list of things the best Bond movie. And I realise that we've not talked about George Lazenby, which we should by the time we get to the end of
Yeah.
talking about Craig. And it's the first time that I would go back and watch a Bond movie and watch them again in the same way that I would now with my Marvel Universe stuff. I got the Blu-rays for it. I think it's added a dimension to Bond because in that very first film they talk about him being a blunt instrument. They do the Bond Begins at the same time that Batman Begins came out, and they started it. They started again at the beginning of his career, and they've had an arc. And for the first time ever, they weren't standalone films. For the first time ever, they had themes that ran through the series, and they had elements that they were sequels upon sequels upon sequels, the same way that the Jason Bourne films were. And I think that's added something into Bond. It's added that sense of continuity. So the aspect of now Daniel Craig moving on is even more intriguing rather than just replacing with another actor. They've taken that entire chapter of that character's life from starting in the missions to walking away at the end of Spectre from his job as 007, which it feels like No Time to Die is what they're playing on, which comes back to the Quentin Tarantino theory that 007 and James Bond is an identity that you pick rather than you're
Yeah.
born that way.
I've always subscribed to that theory. I've always said this, and I know some people have turned around and said that when Skyfall came out, that disproved that theory because he was James Bond born into the family of Bond. But I explained that by saying there was an original James Bond, and that was this James Bond's father. The original James Bond, played by Sean Connery, passed away, and the identity was used for following agents. Whoever got the 007 license always got the James Bond name. Why did M want to recruit this James Bond? Because she had an attachment to the original James Bond because she worked alongside him. And so she was always protective and mother-like towards Daniel Craig's Bond. She recruited him into the agency to follow in his father's footsteps so the James Bond legacy could come back to the family.
Well, that
That's how I
nearly
like to look at
came
it.
true, Andy, in Skyfall because the Albert Finney character was originally going to
It's supposed to
be
be Connery.
Sean Connery, but
Yeah.
he either turned it down because he was ill at the time. So I don't know whether he turned it down to illness or just didn't want to revisit the character as he'd retired. So yeah, where we go from No Time to Die is going to be interesting. I mean, there's been rumors that we'll be introduced to the new Bond at the end of the film.
Yeah.
It's pure speculation. Nobody knows, but it would be an interesting way to go. So we talked about the early Bond films, and we talked about Roger Moore. Sorry, we talked about Sean Connery from Doctor No right through to You Only Live Twice. And again, they followed the same pattern. They built up the Bond that we know today. From the big sets, the huge supervillain Spectre, the bigger and better stunts with each movie got slightly sillier as they went through. From Russia with Love is a gritty Bond film, more akin to the sort of Daniel Craig movies that we've got today.
Yeah.
And then Connery quit at the end of You Only Live Twice. And there was a huge casting call, international casting call, for who was going to be the next Bond. And there were some interesting choices of actors who didn't get the role. So in a what if universe, which preempts what we're going to talk about with What If, there could have been a different Bond series with the actor taking part after Connery. Now, many people think on Her Majesty's Secret Service that ended up starring George Lazenby was a flop. It did really, really
Yeah.
well. It wasn't as successful as the previous Bond films. In actual box office, it made more than Doctor No, and just slightly less than From Russia with Love. But it wasn't a flop. What it was a difficult film. But to some extent, it is the archetype best Bond film of them all
Yeah.
because Bond was given a character, was given something to want and desire and to ultimately lose. And again, in a what if universe, if Sean Connery had played that, that would have been a fantastic out for him,
Yeah.
rather than coming back and doing the rather silly Diamonds Are Forever. What a way to go out for Connery if he'd have played that. But Lazenby wasn't bad. He's much more charming than you think he is. He's a
Hmm.
little bit wooden. He lacks the charisma of Connery. If he'd have gone on to make further Bond films, then I think he would have grown more into the role. But there's lots and lots of reasons as to why he didn't go back. There's a great documentary about the Bond films on. I think it's the gold. No, it's not. I think it's the Casino Royale Blu-ray has a look at the movies, which is a real insight into the Bond movies and the casting. But so many actors were up for that role, um, and then of course so many actors were up for Roger Moore taking over. But
Yeah.
Roger Moore always seemed the safe choice. Now we can't talk about Bond without talking about some of the offshoots, the non-Eon films Bonds, starting with Casino Royale, which we have to talk about, Andy. I know for some people have got an absolute love for it. It is a time capsule, and when you talk about Austin Powers, this is closer to Austin Powers than any of the Bond films.
Yeah, I mean it's a what's new pussycat kind of spy romp caper. Very much of the era that it was made in. Very silly, very ridiculous. Not at all a Bond film. But you know what? As much as I know it's a terrible film, I find some weird enjoyment rewatching it from time to time.
Now, if you've not seen it, it stars. It almost goes back to what we've just been talking about. It stars David Niven as James Bond. His successor is Peter Sellers, and there's also a Jimmy Bond played by Woody Allen. And it plays with this idea that Bond is an identity. So when Broccoli and Saltzman bought the rights to the existing and future Fleming titles, the deal didn't include Casino Royale, which had been produced for TV. In 1954, there was a TV adaptation where Bond works for the CIA and is known as Jimmy Bond. So those rights subsequently got passed on and became the Bond spoof Casino Royale. And there was also a legal case ensured that the film rights to the novel Thunderball were held
Yeah.
by a producer called Kevin McClory, as he, Fleming, and scriptwriter Jack Whittingham had written the film script on which the novel was based. And that led us into, because McClory retained the rights to Thunderball, Never Say Never Again, which Sean Connery famously came back to play Bond for one last time. So, Never Say Never Again, great title, knowingly brilliant, and great to see Connery back on the big screen. Irving Kershner, straight off Empire Strikes Back, directed it, but it just falls incredibly short of being a great Bond film. And the
Yeah.
biggest icon that's missing from it, the thing that spoilt that film for me more than anything else, was the music. Because
Yeah.
what we've grown up with, which was the John Barry score, and subsequently the inspiration from Barry, is missing, and it had almost like a light jazz touch to the soundtrack by Michel Legrand, which kills the film dead for me, and spoils what would have been a fairly interesting Bond spin-off movie.
Yeah. The whole lawsuit, the whole legal issue behind Never Say Never Again, Thunderball issue, is the reason why Spectre wasn't used throughout the Roger Moore era, because that was something directly linked to the original story of Thunderball. And it's why Spectre never got mentioned and Quantum got used instead in the Daniel Craig era, up until they finally resolved it in time for the last film that came out, Spectre, which was a mixed bag of a film. There's a lot that I love in that film, but it just has a few missteps in there that don't quite work. But at the end of it, I can't wait to see. I can't wait to see this final outing for Craig.
Yeah, I mean, as we said, we can only speculate as to the film. Interesting director, went through some other choices for director, including, I think, looked to be on the cards for some time, Danny Boyle.
Yeah,
But Cary Fukunaga, who had done True Detective for HBO was brought on, a really visual and clever, really clever director who knows how to direct action. If you remember the famous one shot in True Detective, which is so
Yeah.
cinematic, he's well worth watching for this. Wouldn't have never been on the cards for me, but there's been some great directors on it. Martin Campbell, Sam Mendes. Even though Quantum of Solace is looked at poorly, I think Mark Foster did well with the work. Michael Apted, Roger Spottiswoode, going back to Guy Hamilton, Peter Hunt, Terence Young. There's been some great directors. I'm never going to mention John Glenn because I think that's when the films just fell apart and just looked incredibly bland. But looking forward to it. We'll find out this week. We will review it next week. And you know what? It might be No Time to Die, but it's no time to wait for me.
What would you consider the best films in the Bond franchise?
Good choice, because you mentioned this. I mean, I've not been at all disappointed with Craig's run. For the first time, I really invested in Bond rather than them being an outing. I think Casino Royale is fantastic. I think Skyfall offers so much depth into the character. I have a love affair with Live and Let Die. Not a great Bond movie, but it was my first real introduction when I really went for it. From Russia with Love still holds on as probably being the best story. And on Her Majesty's Secret Service, because,
Yeah.
as I said, if it had been Connery's swan song, it's such a great script. It's so well told, and it gives us an insight into Bond that we'd not seen before. We see Bond get married, and we see the subsequent loss of that, and it was a very, very brave move. So, yeah, definitely those for me.
I'd agree definitely with On Her Majesty's Secret Service, Live and Let Die, and Casino Royale. I would throw into the mix Goldfinger, which I think was the one that defined all the aspects of Bond
icon
that would go forward. It's the template, and License to Kill. My rewatch of it recently, it holds up so well, and so that makes it into my top 5 basically. Connery still just about pips it as my favourite actor in the role of Bond, but Daniel Craig is so close to stealing it that if this final outing hits all the right notes, Connery is second place. Brosnan, sadly, is bottom of the pile for me.
Right.
The recent rewatches just show that he was cosplaying Roger Moore, and Lazenby takes the mid-ground.
Yeah, it would be nice to see more from Lazenby. As I said, I think if he'd have survived, and because he quit rather than was sacked, from what I believe. I think the urban legend is that he was fired from it, but I think he quit. I don't think he had a particularly great time on it.
There was
But
reports of like difficulties on set, and he was very diva-ish at times, which caused some friction
yeah,
while making it, which is a shame because it would have been interesting to see what he could have done, how he could have grown it. Who would you pick for the next Bond? Who would be your
wow.
first pick choice?
Okay, I've got a couple of choices because I'm know in the next week I'm going to be asked this on the BBC. Probably I'll probably be doing 3 or 4 a day talking about this. So I'm going to go with 2 interesting choices. Now I'm going to say something that may be deemed controversial, but I don't think it should be a black actor, unless of course we do understand that Bond is a figurehead, is an identity, as
Yeah.
opposed to being the character. Then it would work, but I would rather see a black secret agent movie with
Yeah.
a character that because then you've got to tack on sort of the upbringing and the way that Bond has been brought up, and I would rather see a new character
Yeah.
than see a black actor take that over. So I have two choices for it. One would be Jamie Bell. I think Jamie Bell, now in his mid 30s, has got enough chops on him to be able to bring something very likable to him. I know it's always easy to think about it as the young guy from what was that comedy? What was the Jamie Bell movie? The Dancer.
Yeah. Shit.
Fuck.
Yeah. Where he was a ballet dancer.
Yeah, it's just escaped me completely.
Billy Elliot.
Yeah. I know you remember him as Billy Elliot, and I know he's come a long way from that. So I think Jamie Bell's got some chops, but my absolutely perfect choice is Aidan Turner.
Oh, you
Who
stole mine.
did I? Oh right, oh brilliant. Well, we can agree on something because he grew up through Being Human. He's got the smouldering good
Yeah.
looks. He's got the charm. He's got the personality. Proved that he can do a British accent with Paul Dark.
Yeah.
He was in a couple of Christmases ago a great BBC adaptation of an Agatha Christie, and the BBC were doing them for a few years. And I'll tell you what it is because I can't remember. The BBC had been doing a seasonal Agatha Christie adaptation, and he was in Then There Were None, and he played. I think it was either somebody who'd been in the Secret Service or was a big game hunter, but he had the right element of charm, and he had the right element of danger, and he proved that in Being Human. I think he would be an absolutely spot on Bond and would bring something very, very different to it. Slightly younger, but that means that you can stick around for some time and grow. Because if you're going to be in Bond for 4 years, then it's 10 years out of your life,
Yeah.
and I think that would work wonderfully. So yeah, he would be my choice.
Yeah, I mean, he's top of my list because I've followed his career since like I first saw him in Being Human, and he's always stood out. But he's one of those people always pick the big names. They go, "Oh, I want Idris Elba to be Bond. Oh, I want," and they go for like people who are already huge names. But Bond is always cast best when it's casting someone who's known but not huge, because the character of Bond should be what sells it, not who's playing the role. And Aidan Turner fits that bill perfectly because he's a solid actor who can bring such presence to it, but he's not universally known.
Yeah, and he could hold his own in The Hobbit, because he's got great
Yeah.
screen presence. So, yeah, I think he's an absolutely perfect choice. If you'd have asked me, if you'd have asked me a couple of years ago, then I would have said Michael Fassbender, but I think he's too old for it now.
Yeah. Excellent choices.
So we'll see. We shall, with a bit of luck, find out this week as to what becomes of Daniel Craig's Bond, and I'm pretty certain, in my estimation, that they've already cast the new Bond because they've had a year to do it. I think they're just waiting for the right time to tell us.
To announce it. Yeah.